Hello there my very good friends, Andy Murray here for WhatCulture Wrestling, back again with another one of these videos. It's our breakdown of Vice's Dark Side of the Ring, the latest episode of which was on Collision in Korea. This event is technically the biggest wrestling show of all time in terms of attendance. It went down in April 1995, New Japan Pro Wrestling, WCW co-promoting in North Korea. There's a lot to get through on this one, so let's just get on with it. Here are 10 things that we learned from Dark Side of the Ring, Collision in Korea. Number 10, how it all came together. So, obviously, two sides to this coin. WCW over here, New Japan over here. Eric Bischoff over here, Antonio Inoki over here. Both Bischoff and Inoki were actually on this episode. Bischoff, talking about the situation, he rises to power in WCW in 1994 when he becomes vice president. WCW is still seen as something of a regional promotion compared to the larger WWF at the time, so he wants to expand internationally. He wants to rebuild the relationship with New Japan Pro Wrestling. That goes well. And Collision in Korea is a huge step in all of that. Antonio Inoki is the New Japan Pro Wrestling chairman at the time, and he calls up Eric Bischoff, wants to know, can you bring the WCW roster to North Korea for what he called a peace festival? Inoki already had a reputation for these kind of big headline drawing, crazy events. He fought Muhammad Ali, of course, in the famous wrestler versus boxer sort of fight back in 1976, but in Collision in Korea, he wanted to put something together that would rival all of them and leave them in the dust. And a big part of that was motivated by Inoki's political career. He lived this dual life as a politician and a wrestler. He was immensely famous in Japan as a result of this, and he wanted to build these diplomatic bridges, potentially, between Japan and North Korea. This was more than just a wrestling show. Number 9, a scary first impression. Eric Bischoff describing the traveling plans for heading to North Korea is pretty amazing because he kind of acknowledges that if he wanted to get government approval for this journey, number 1, it would probably take about 6 months for a decision, and number 2, well, they might not even allow it, of course. Traveling to North Korea, it's kind of an isolated nation. So what did Eric Bischoff do? He said, screw it. We're going anywhere, not waiting for permission. They did so by traveling to Japan first and then flying to North Korea, and the stories from this plane ride sound kind of nuts. It sounds like the original plane ride from hell, to be perfectly honest. So North Korea sent over this military plane. It's an old, rickety, uncomfortable thing that Scott Norton says it felt like it was designed in the 1940s. And Ric Flair in particular was like, what the hell is going on? In Norton's words, he was going kind of crazy on the plane ride over there. And Too Cold Scorpio tells the story. He's sitting at a window seat. He can see them kind of flying over South Korea to come up to the north. And on the border, he sees lines of cannons on the south, pointing north, pointing down to the south. From the north, you got rows of tanks. I mean, when you're an American wrestler and you're traveling this, journey to this country you probably don't know a whole lot about at the time, that's gotta be pretty damn scary. Particularly when you get to the airport and, in Scott Norton's words, you get there and there's this much dust there because nobody's visited in years and years and years. The military confiscate their passports. Norton said they confiscated his Walkman, for God's sake. That's kind of crazy, but he got the impression straight away that everyone there, military-wise, hated them. Number 8. Pure propaganda. One of the talking heads on this week's episode was former CNN correspondent Mike Chinoy, who was given the assignment of covering this event and provided some pretty important context, talking about how North Korea will use these appearances, these publicity events. I mean, they had Muhammad Ali with them. That's a pretty goddamn big name. To present themselves and spread kind of pro-state propaganda, which is exactly what happened almost as soon as they got there, going by the description of this. On their way to the hotel, so before they even kind of unpacked and settled in, the wrestlers were taken to a statue of Kim Il-sung, the former leader of North Korea, who had passed away 1 year prior. They were all given flowers, instructed to walk up the steps to the base of this statue, lay them down and show their respect. And in Chinoy's words, they would use this, of course, the regime, as propaganda. Look how great this whole thing is. Look at them laying down the flowers. We got clips of Ric Flair talking about it being a great honor to be there. He was interviewed by the news. They filmed every single thing. And if you've seen like documentaries and other bits of media on the North Korean situation, you've probably seen something akin to this before. You'll have heard of like the state-sponsored tourist tours and everything. And if you haven't, look some of that stuff up. It's really fascinating. But this is 1995, and public knowledge of the situation there might not have been as widespread. And to think that this is a bunch of pro wrestlers involved in this is kind of nuts. Number 7, the extent of the surveillance. So when the wrestlers get to the hotel, they realize that they are not going to be able to move a muscle without somebody paying attention to it. They get there, Scott Norton describes the situation. Scott Norton's great on this show, by the way. Why doesn't he do more media stuff? He's awesome. But he tells the story, he goes to his room and he's followed up by these military dudes, and he gets in his room and the guys just hang about outside his hotel room, 10 feet down the hallway. There they are. He tells the story of going to visit Hawk, who's like a room or two away from him. The military guy follows him there, stands outside again, right next to Hawk's own kind of entourage. Too Cold tells a similar story. Too Cold Scorpio talking about how, well, I can't do anything. I'm stuck in my hotel room. All we've got are 3 government political channels on television. Losing his mind by all accounts. But there's a respite in the form of a pool table. The wrestlers find this pool table. Norton spends 2 hours negotiating with the girl on the hotel desk to get some pool balls so they can play some pool, have some fun, cut loose for a little bit. They have to check with the military, which is kind of nutty in itself, but they finally get it. They play a little game. Norton hits the ball bounces off the table, as it's prone to doing if you're crap at pool like me, and kind of clumsy, lands on the marble floor. The military guys are furious. They shut it down immediately, and that was that. No more fun for the WCW and New Japan wrestlers. Number 6, Hawk versus Too Cold Scorpio, round 1. Backstage fights in pro wrestling. You've heard loads of stories about them, no doubt, if you've been a fan for longer than 5 minutes, but this one is nuts. Too Cold Scorpio and Hawk in North Korea on a bus, laying into each other. It came about because Too Cold had existing beef with Ric Flair. He piped up about Ric Flair, said something that Hawk didn't like. They brawled a little bit. Too Cold's side of the story is very one-sided, as you would imagine, but the core of it is that, they both lamped each other a couple of times. He actually had Hawk's eyeball halfway out of his socket, in his words. That's how the thing went. And they were eventually pulled apart on the bus, of course. But it's kind of crazy to think about that they've gone to this place, this country they've never visited before, and they're fighting amongst themselves. And this won't be the last we heard of the rivalry between Too Cold and Hawk. Number 5, the true extent of the surveillance. And this is one of the craziest stories of all. Scott Norton has spent 3 days in his hotel room trying to phone home, trying to phone his wife. He finally gets through and his wife is freaking out. She's like, why haven't you called? Where have you been? She thinks he's been out with the boys, partying, drinking, everything else. And he's trying to explain, no, you don't realize how it is here. You don't understand the nature of this place. Let me explain. And he gets a little bit worked up, Scott Norton, by all accounts. He uses the word shithole to describe North Korea. At that moment, the line goes dead. He thinks his wife has hung up on him. Oh, no. Knock, knock, knock at the door. Who's there? It's a guy who speaks perfect English. North Korean fellow who speaks perfect English. A couple of guys with guns. Scott Norton is forcibly taken by his hotel room, by all accounts, and taken to a darkened room where another guy comes in, and he's fearing for his life at this point. He feels, and he describes it as like a scene out of the movie, that these people would have no problem dealing with him. The guy who comes in the room, again, speaks very good English, shouts at him, you don't disrespect our great nation, you don't say these negative things, if you do, this is gonna end badly for you. So Norton, who is massive, is quaking, and he says basically he'll do anything he can to get out of that situation. He apologizes, he gets, told to leave the room. But man, that's a really sobering experience. All you've done is say to your wife on the telephone, no, listen, this is what's going on. It's been intercepted, it's been surveillanced, that's not even a word, but you know what I'm trying to say. And minutes later, you are taken into a room, held at gunpoint, and told, hey, don't do that again because it's not going to go well for you. That is terrifying. Number 4, Hawk versus Too Cold Scorpio, round 2. This is where things get really crazy in this personal rivalry. The situation flares up again. Too Cold says that he tried to smooth it over with Hawk. He said, hey man, we're Americans here, we're on a peace tour and we're fighting amongst ourselves. Well, Hawk didn't like that. Apparently he lamped him one, he sucker punched him, and at a ceremonial dinner that night, Too Cold was plotting his next move. He took a couple of stainless steel chopsticks that he'd saved up and he was rooming with Chris Benoit. He goes back to the hotel room. What does he do? He opens the window, hard concrete windowsill, and he starts sharpening the chopsticks into a shiv. Yeah, this happened. He taped them together and he had intentions, seemingly, of shanking Hawk in North Korea. Benoit talked him out of it, talked him down a little bit, said, if you do this, you will be here for the rest of your life. But that's not the end of this story. Number 3, the live experience. So as you can imagine, it's a packed out stadium in North Korea. There are well over 100,000 people there each night, total of over 300,000 people across the 2 nights. But wrestling is alien to the North Koreans. This is a live experience unlike anything they'll have seen before. It's explained to Scott Norton and Hawk on their way to the event that people are forced to be there. They're not there because they want to be. So when they're wrestling, and you have the song and dance before, the North Koreans put on a hell of a show for them. Musical numbers, dancing, everything else. But when the wrestling happens, nobody knows how to react. And Norton tells the story of Hawk just hitting the ropes and cursing out the fans and going, what the F are you doing? Come on, make some noise, all of this stuff. Nothing. It's dead silence in that building. And if you've seen footage of Collision in Korea, you will know this already, but it's kind of harrowing to listen to the wrestlers giving their account of it. So it falls on the shoulders of Antonio Inoki to save this. He's wrestling Ric Flair in one of the main events. And the North Koreans have an affinity for him already, for Inoki, for his affiliation with Riki Dozan, who is of course the famous pro wrestler from North Korea who went to Japan, was a trailblazer there, but couldn't hide his North Korean nationality and was allegedly murdered by the Yakuza as a result of that. And the crowd do warm up to Inoki. Him and Flair work an old school style match. Bischoff kind of attributes it a little bit to Flair being such a good worker, so good at getting the other guy over. But it's interesting that you go through this whole 2-night show and it's not until the very end that you get people warming up. It's just an interesting pro wrestling dynamic, isn't it? Because, you have all kinds of different crowds from all around the world. This one took something very, very special to warm them up to a style of entertainment and sport that they probably just had no idea what they were watching. Number 2, Hawk versus Too Cold Scorpio, round 3. So how does the relationship between Too Cold Scorpio and Hawk pan out? Does Too Cold deliver on his plan to shank the guy in North Korea? He does not. They've got a ceremonial dinner planned. They've only got like a few hours left in North Korea. One last thing, this was his last opportunity to settle the score, in his words. Him and Hawk end up alone together. They get in an elevator and Too Cold's like, what do you want to do? Do you want to square this out? Do you want to start this? At first, Hawk doesn't reply, but he eventually backs down. When Scorpio asks him one last time, Hawk says, look man, I'm miserable here, I'm low on my pills. That's what he says, steroids and stuff, Too Cold's words, so take them with a pinch of salt. They buried the hatchet, seemingly. Too Cold said, look, I accept your apology, but if you ever want to meet up in Japan to settle this business, you know where to find me. Hawk never showed up there. The whole deal was sorted out seemingly in Too Cold's favor, and that's the thing about this story. You've kind of got to apply a little bit of cynicism, but it's a crazy story nonetheless. And at number 1, the aftermath. So this whole thing did not work in Inoki's political favor. He lost his re-election to office that same year, and he ended up leaving politics for around 2 decades. Now, as far as the American wrestlers go, after being boxed in for 4 days in this place where they would be under constant surveillance and couldn't really get out, they were obviously quite relieved to get out, get back to Japan. The story they tell here of Ric Flair, and Norton and Eric Bischoff both say it, Ric Flair was so delighted to get on Japanese soil again that he got off the plane. He's wearing a $2,000 suit, the snakeskin shoes. He literally just gets down on all fours, kisses the tarmac. There we go. here we are. And Eric Bischoff is Eric Bischoff, you know, so the way he signs off on this whole thing is kind of perfect. Biggest wrestling show of all time? Yep, I did that. It's a really funny one because he does admit, obviously, that the people didn't pay to be there or anything like that. They didn't necessarily want to be there. They were told they had to, or bad things may happen to them. But at the same time, he does get some amusement from imagining Vince McMahon somewhere in Stamford absolutely fizzing that somebody had the temerity to run a wrestling event bigger than WrestleMania. You gotta take these small wins when you can, haven't you, in situations like this. But anyway, guys, that's it. My take on another wild episode of Vice's Dark Side of the Ring, this one on Collision in Korea. Let us know what you thought of the show down in the comment section below. Once you've done that, you can like, you can share, subscribe, all of that good stuff. Then you can follow us on Twitter at WhatCulture WWE and myself at Andy H. Murray, where you can tell me how wrong I am. Goodbye.